I call the Shadow Minister and Member for Heffron.
Mr Deputy Speaker, Neville Wran was the greatest political leader in my lifetime. I first met him in November of 1975 when I first got involved with the Labor Party after the sacking of the Whitlam government. Neville was in Wagga Wagga for a by-election that was to take place a couple of weeks before the federal election. Neville attended a hall that was packed in this bastion of a conservative town with people there ready to heckle the Leader of the Opposition as he was going to advocate the election of a then Labor Mayor of Wagga that he had recruited to run in the by-election. From the time Neville began to speak, you could hear a pin drop in the room. He captivated and maintained the attention of such a large audience and actually inspired everyone in the room. That was 6 months before, 6 months later he was to become Premier of New South Wales, but only a short period of time after a devastating loss by the Labor Party in 1975. And although all those who have contributed to this debate have referred to the history of Neville's service and the Ranslide, in 1977 there was another devastating loss to the ALP nationally, and the Labor Party was on its knees. Yet in between this period of time, Neville was able to, 6 months after 1975, bring the Labor Party out of the wilderness into government in New South Wales. Shortly after my election to this House, I received a note. My local newspaper had written the story and very flatteringly had placed my photograph next to a photograph of Neville Wran. And a note arrived dated the 4th of September 2012. It said, "Great victory, great story, Neville Wran." It was actually given to me by Brian Dale, and Brian said to me as he handed it to me in a framed certificate, "Ron, this will be the last thing that Neville will ever write." And that probably is the saddest thing that I experienced when he handed me that signed note, because it is Neville Wran that inspired me to be part of the political process. It was his government that touched every single citizen of New South Wales. It was Neville Wran who, when he took on the leadership of the Labor Party, did he say this was his one shot at the locker. This eminent, successful, highly reputable Queen's Counsel was prepared to come into this particular House and take on the Labor Party leadership and give it one shot. If he didn't get there, he was going to go back to the bar and continue to earn the fortune that he was earning before he became a member of the House. And I think that says everything about this great man, because he was prepared to offer himself to the people of New South Wales, and doing it for no other purpose than for what he fundamentally believed in. And that was the hallmark of his government, because it didn't matter how seemingly unpopular the cause was. He did what he believed to be right. He did change the entire public transport system and every bus in the Sydney metropolitan area. He did enact the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. He took on the entire medical profession when he closed Crown Street and St Margaret's and Eastern Suburbs Hospital and said, "I'm going to build beds in the West." When you look at Westmead Hospital, you should see Neville Wran's face on Westmead Hospital. He was one who was a passionate civil libertarian and would not budge on law reform issues, the belief in the doctrine of separation of powers. When it was suggested to him by the Treasury boffins that the Government Insurance Office that provided damages and money to people who became paraplegics as a result of car accidents, that this was not sustainable, He said, I'm not reforming the government insurance office because I'm not taking the poor and disabled money away from them. He had courage. The House might remember during the Wran government days, there wasn't just one tabloid newspaper per day, there were three. There was the Daily Telegraph in the morning, plus there was a Sun, plus there was the Mirror, and everything that the state government did was subject to scrutiny by the popular press. And despite that, every time there was criticism, there was no beating of a law and order drum. There was no running into this house in craven cowardice trying to adopt mandatory sentencing legislation, because this Labor leader would stand his ground, come what may, based on his fundamental beliefs. And if there is anything that I have gained or perceived from Neville Wran was this, and that is that if you were a government of substance, if you were a government of merit, if you stood your ground on what you believed and you articulated with what you believed, that ultimately those views would flow through to the community. And in fact, you've only got to look at the election results. Neville Wran never lost an election and he never lost a by-election, to indicate that that philosophy that covered his period of time is right. The other thing about Neville Wran too that struck me as I was giving some thought of sitting there was this: never was there a man more loyal to his friends. After Lionel Murphy's conviction was quashed by the Court of Criminal Appeal and a new trial ordered, the Conservative establishment had attacked Lionel Murphy, this House might remember, from the time of his appointment to the High Court. Neville Wran, an eminent Queen's Counsel and somebody who knew the law extremely well, stood up and said, I have a deep-seated belief in Lionel Murphy's innocence. When Neville Wran made those statements, he knew what he was saying and he knew the consequences of what he was saying, but he never stepped back from it. Such was his fundamental belief, and prepared to put his body on the line to stand up for what he believed was right. This state has lost a giant. This state has lost a role model to all those Labor governments throughout Australia and federally that followed his model. This state and this country has lost a giant that has touched the lives of everybody in this state. I will go to my grave with his legacy on the forefront of my mind on behalf of everybody. I extend to Neville and his family, and to I know those close friends of his, my utmost and heartfelt condolences of Neville Wran.